say nice things about poll books. Hey, I'm a poll.
You know, it is the problem we have.
You're on.
Oh, sure.
It's early. Okay, we are on the air and we are early. Welcome everyone this evening, and we have daylight now when we start our council meeting, so it's kind of nice for a change. Would you like to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Mary, roll call.
Olson.
Here.
Collins.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Kellum.
Here.
Kopsinski.
Here.
Coburn.
Here.
Canopa.
Here. Okay, this evening for scheduled business is we have a public hearing, and this is a legislative public hearing regarding legislative amendments to the Albany Development Code recommended by the Business Ready Task Force to remove obstacles to development, address issues with home businesses, and plan developments as described in Planning File DC 0313. The applicant is the City of Albany. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table next to the city clerk and our Democrat Herald reporter right next to him. I call to order this legislative public hearing at 7:15 p.m. And at this time, I'll call for staff report, Planner Ann Catlin.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilors. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. This is kind of a monumental moment for a large package of development code amendments that many of you and the community and staff have been working on for almost 2 years. This is a package of amendments that started with staff identifying obstacles that were brought to our attention with some areas in the development code, and the list started getting a little lengthy, and we thought maybe we need to form a task force, so that did happen. A task force with representatives from the business community and residents and neighborhoods, planning commission, city council was formed back almost 2 years ago, and we have been working on the list of staff issues, and that task force did identify additional issues in the development code, primarily related to redevelopment and development within the city, and we've called this the Business Ready Task Force and the Business Ready Code Updates Package. So over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've worked with this task force. We did hold a public open house earlier this year. We mailed notice to every single property owner, over 14,000 in the city. And then, of course, did our regular noticing in the paper, on the web, and the Planning Commission hearing was back in February. We received some written comments before that meeting, primarily from the open house, and had 3 people testify, and there have been 2 letters received since then, actually came in today, that are on the dais, and I'll go over those. So I wanted to just quickly review all of the different areas of the amendments. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I'd be happy to answer questions later, and then I'll focus on the testimony we've received and a few minor amendments that staff would propose to the packet before you tonight. So a few issues that we're looking at: reducing plan review process time and costs. Several different steps would do this. In the plan development standards that we have, we would eliminate a step and reduce the open space requirement and how it's calculated, which would save a lot of time for applicants. There are several minor developments, typically changes of use or expansions to existing development that currently require site plan review, that we propose no longer require review if they can meet clear and objective standards. And then another big one we think is an extension to our land use approvals, which is currently 3 years. We're proposing a 2-year extension for all land use approvals, and then a second 2-year extension for phased developments, which often take a lot longer to get underway. And related to this item, you will hear testimony tonight. We received a letter from Attorney Walter Gowell. He's a city attorney in several places, but he represents a property owner in Albany. And they have a land use decision that's expiring later this month, and they really appreciate that we're proposing this extension, but they did notice that we should add the sentence in in 1.083 at the very end, which is on your dais, the first page in yellow. Let developments that have not expired yet go ahead and be able to take advantage of these proposed amendments. And then if what we're proposing is that in order to get an extension, you have to submit a written request. Well, the problem is this may get adopted, and so they've submitted their written request now, anticipating the adoption of this, but without that last part, these standards wouldn't apply. And staff supports these, this extra portion of a sentence there in 1.083. And then the second part in 1 below that is underlined as well on the screen, is that it is a little challenging to determine when the expiration date is. It's different depending on the kind of land uses, whether it was the date the notice was mailed and the date the notice was signed. And so Mr. Gallo also proposed a second sentence there, and staff supports that recommendation. One other potential change that we've talked about, which would be helpful, is we are requesting that the extension come in 45 days before it expires. That just gives us enough time to ensure we can evaluate the request against all relevant land use laws. We had talked about 30 days. We just weren't sure with our staff load and staffing levels whether we could make 30 days work. We probably could, but you may hear requests to go to 30 days, and we were trying to just buy a little more time with 45 days. So that is a proposed amendment that would be to Exhibit C that staff is recommending, and it's labeled A on your dais. There's some pages that are all clipped together, but it's the first page there. So other amendments, one of the big issues the task force looked at were existing sites, redevelopment of small infill sites, and redevelopment of a lot of our sites that are actually non-conforming. So several amendments will make it easier for redevelopment of these sites, adding flexibility by making these sites eligible for adjustments within the code, and also relaxing the design standards for small infill sites. And then non-conforming sites, a couple of things are happening. We can go into more detail about it, but just one of the big ones is we are going to allow reinstatement of non-conforming status for a time period, so that, but there would be a process. So we'd review that and make sure it isn't actually a non-legal development, that kind of thing. The big issue we heard from the development community was with the non-conforming sites, they have to currently be brought up to code, and the cost of that is often it can be costly and maybe keeping people from redeveloping these sites. So the suggestion is that only when site improvements exceed $25,000 in building permit value would they then have to start bringing the site into compliance, and we have a list in the code that prioritizes improvements starting with the lower cost items. But we do think that would make a visible change in the area where we've got some sites that don't have landscaping and really aren't contributing to the commercial districts. And then another minor thing, but apparently is a fairly big issue, is related to parking. We would currently evaluate parking with the old use and the proposed use and require upgrades to the parking lot, but now we're proposing that if up to 2 spaces are required, that we wouldn't even require those to be provided. So the other really big issue is G, and we have a lot of vacant buildings in our light industrial zone, and many years ago we actually did allow for a more diverse set of uses, some commercial or non-typical industry types, and many of these buildings were built for those other uses. So we've had a lot of requests for non-industrial uses in these buildings, and there is a proposal to allow some commercial uses just in the existing buildings, not on vacant sites, with some conditions that they don't affect other businesses in the area, that they could go back to industrial use if needed. Another thing that has come up is that there are some small-scale manufacturing and industrial office-type uses that don't have a lot of off-site impacts, but they're limited to the industrial zone, so we're proposing to allow those in some of our commercial and mixed-use zones. Downtown development, residential development, we want to ensure that we're not proposing any obstacles there. So we looked at our private open space requirements and our common open space requirements and are essentially going to exempt buildings in the downtown area from those requirements, thinking of the historic district and location to existing facilities, that those may not be necessary. And my favorite set of amendments is related to parking. We will be, I think, substantially reducing the amount of parking that is required with some changes, as well as allowing for on-street parking to count and for some incentives to reduce parking that overall should reduce the cost for the developer to either redevelop or develop a new site. So the home businesses is a topic that staff added to the list primarily because we've been receiving complaints about standards that are very subjective and not very clear. And so we did have the task force evaluate this. This maybe wasn't their typical thing to look at, but this is actually where we received the most public comments and where the Planning Commission spent the most time. So currently we allow home businesses outright, and there are several types that are not allowed, but we allow businesses outright subject to standards. But what does excessive traffic mean? Frequent deliveries, different standards that were hard for us to measure and then really work with the person that complained and with the business owner. So the proposal is to modify the standards that were subjected, make them clear and measurable, and then also to allow more home businesses through a conditional use process. You know, our city is very diverse and our neighborhoods are diverse. In some areas it might be okay to exceed those limits, where you might have a larger property, for example, and that would be done through the conditional use process to allow neighborhood input prior to a business coming in and avoiding the complaints, hopefully. So the Planning Commission, as I noted, did spend a fair amount of time reviewing the comments about this. They did make some changes. I listed a few of those there, increasing the number of outside employees. Currently, we actually don't allow home businesses in accessory buildings, proposing to allow them in accessory buildings. They try to define excessive traffic and frequent deliveries and a few other items. But there's one area that they talked about, and after your packet went out, I was able to hear back from a few of them. They thought, well, rather than have a list of prohibited uses, maybe any use that is on the prohibited list we could consider through the conditional use process. And they primarily talked about what is now over in the right-hand columns 1, 2, and 3, auto body repair, painting for compensation, mechanical repair conducted outside of an enclosed building, and then headquarters or dispatch centers where employees and or vehicles come to the site. They didn't talk about the ones that are remaining over on the left side, which is the current list of prohibited uses. And those primarily relate to dangerous materials that the fire marshal may have concerns about. Junk and salvage operations I didn't think would probably be compatible in a neighborhood. And then display or sale of vehicles. So I was able to email the Planning Commission to see, are you sure you really wanted to do that? And I heard back that they were most concerned about the ones that are in the right-hand column being permitted through the conditional use process and keeping the remaining prohibited uses as prohibited uses allowed outright. So that is a change that staff is proposing, and that is the second set of proposed amendments on the dais for you. It's Article 3, it's labeled B at the top, and it's pages 2 and 4, and the yellow highlight would make those changes in Exhibit A of the ordinance. And I'm sorry, they all got stapled together, but the areas shown to be amended are in yellow highlight. So the last area, which I would say probably the community is most excited about, are a few amendments to the sign standards. This is a area of the code that really hasn't been amended for decades. Since I've been with the city, it hasn't really been touched at all. except for, a few little things here and there. And this was never intended to be the complete overhaul of the sign code, but we were struggling with using the sign code, and our institutional memory of Don has been gone now for some years. So two purposes of the amendments was making the code easier to use by even staff. And so we reduced some redundancy within the code and try to make it easier to figure out how much signage can I have, when I have this building in this location. I think we've done a good job with that. We also did find that some of the standards did seem limiting, and so we appointed a subcommittee of the Business Ready Task Force and included some members outside of the task force, sign representatives and an architect and resident planning commissioner, and they evaluated it. And so we do have a few amendments proposed. We're proposing to remove the aggregate maximum, which is currently 2 signs per street frontage, so that signs are just going to be measured by sign type. And wall signs is our most common sign type. Right now, if you don't have a freestanding sign, you could have 2 signs on one wall per frontage. Well, we've had requests from businesses that want more than 2 signs, but we can't allow that. So we thought, well, if we look at a total allowance, does it matter whether we have 3 signs or 1 sign? An example might be a Walmart has numerous businesses within it. They can't have the, separate signs. It's challenging to make that work. The other is that we have a 12% restriction of the area of the wall, and also a maximum 100 square foot size of any one sign. So the new formula would be to measure the sign allowance on the building length. So there's still a relationship to the scale based on the length of the building, but that we don't worry about a 12% or a max of 100 square feet. But we have a proposed fix for that, which I'll cover in just a minute, and you did receive a letter from Christina Richardson on your dais, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Temporary signs is another area where we've had issues, signs in the right-of-way, signs in ODOT's right-of-way, in clear vision areas. So a few fixes there, going from 60 to 120 days for these temporary signs, allowing one A-frame sign outside of the downtown year-round. I think that's a big plus for businesses. And then, all these fundraiser events that you see around town, none of them are getting sign permits, but we just want them to know what the regulations are so they put their sign in the right place. So we are proposing a registration process for each event. So the letter on the dais that you also received by email today, there were a couple of issues, really good issues that Christina raised, and I'm really glad we got the letter. The first is how we calculate wall allowance. The proposal is to go to 1 square foot for each lineal foot of wall frontage. And after we got this, I looked at that and I thought, was that right? Should that be 1.5 square feet? And there was some discussion with people on the sign committee and with staff, and we think 1.5 square feet is the right number for that. She is proposing 1.75 square feet. I think that would help her reuse an existing sign, and I've talked to her about ways that we can try to make that work. But I did speak with our representatives from the sign industry, and they said that that's a fairly common formula to use 1.5 square feet per lineal foot of building frontage for walls, and that in thinking through, they've been doing the evaluation, would it be better under the current code or the proposed code, that allowance would be sufficient. The other issue is we won't have that 12% wall cap, which really seemed to be what was limiting before, but in the few cases where you would need more than 1 square foot per lineal foot of building frontage, that would actually, we feel that was reasonable, and the intent was not to reduce the amount of signage. It was to try to just make it easier to use.
Question?
Yeah.
When you talk about frontage, you're talking about frontage on one, well, for example, their building is fronting on Highway 20 and Price Road. So are we talking about frontage down both sides, or are we talking about frontage on one side?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So right now, there is an aggregate total allowance, which is based on street frontage. So using the example in the letter, you would have Sandy M street frontage and Price Road street frontage. But that was the allowance for wall signs and for freestanding signs, or any signs that they want, based on that formula. Now we're separating out, so there isn't that aggregate total. We're just going to have a formula for wall signs, and the formula for freestanding signs is no change to it, but they're separate so that it doesn't rob from the bank account for the total. But also under the new code is the proposal is to go for building frontage, which would also include sides for parking lots. And right now, the property at Price Road, I do have a handout if we need it over there, that they wouldn't be allowed to have signage on sides that didn't front the street, but under the proposed standards, they would be able to have signs that front a parking lot or a street. So the word building frontage actually includes parking areas as well as street frontages. And so it increases the allowance, beyond this one example, for businesses that want to have more orientation than just to the street with their signs.
Well, I'm evidently not understanding, because are we talking about the street that their parking lot is on, or because they face both, are we talking about both? Because they have frontage on two streets.
They do.
They have it, yeah.
They get an allowance for each side, for St. Am and also for Price Road currently.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I made that.
Well, maybe I was just being
Yeah.
dumb.
No, I could be clear. Yeah, so another issue raised was allowing adjustments or another way of calculating area, so maybe your front could have a little bit more, and I think it would be a little challenging to get it right. We do think that 1.5 square feet will accommodate most situations, but we do have an adjustment allowance in the code already, so if that was needed for a property, they can certainly apply for the adjustment already, so that's in the code. And then she raised an issue about freestanding signs, and it's particular to her property, but whether businesses can share freestanding sign and whose responsibility is it for the cost. And we don't regulate sign content, so just because you own a property doesn't mean that it has to be your business that has a sign there. You could actually lease that allowance out to another business because we don't regulate sign content. So I have talked with her and through some of these issues, and you'll probably hear from her tonight, but I feel that the one proposal that is recommended by staff is to change the formula from 1 square foot for each lineal foot of building frontage to 1.5 square feet. Now, the question for you is, we are also proposing, except in our downtown areas where we have pedestrian areas and historic buildings and a lot of houses, and that would be in the CB, HD, LE, and MUR zones. The current formula for those is only 1 square foot per building frontage, and that we just keep it 1 square foot in those zones only, primarily because it's a completely different area, and they have not had a problem with the standards there. But that is up to you.
Question? Do they have the ability to come back and request a larger area as like other people outside the area does?
The district?
Right.
In these zones?
Right. I mean, if they're at the maximum and for some reason their sign has a horn on it or, whatever, and they would go over that, can they apply to get that extra little bit like they could if they were out someplace else?
Well, we could see if it qualifies for an adjustment or a variance, but with the other changes, they'll actually have a larger allowance for signs than they currently have because of the switch to building frontage. Most of our downtown buildings really don't have, extra frontage, but they would actually have more allowance if we allowed those that might have parking lots adjacent to them to have a sign on the parking lot side. Riley's might be an example. I'm not Riley's, over by, I've forgotten the name, it's closed now. Anthony's was the most recent name. Wyatt's, back behind there, for example, or on the side. We haven't had an issue with allowance being a problem in the downtown area, so it is a little harder with historic storefronts and windows to have a really big sign because we don't have a lot of big blank walls, so I think the 1 square foot is appropriate there, but...
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. That is pretty much it. I didn't go over the review criteria for development codes, but amendments, but it's that they better achieve the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. We had a lot of citizen input. Goal 1, most of these changes support all of our policies and goals, or a lot of them under Goal 9, economic development. And then we evaluated all the purpose statements for the zoning districts and the other purposes of the development code, and staff feels they meet the review criteria. Planning Commission unanimously recommended that you approve the amendments, and then staff proposes, based on the issues that have come up since they met, that you approve with the proposed changes as I've identified here, and they're on the dais. Are there any more questions?
Questions, Bill?
It looks like Dick and I, and maybe others, got 2 copies of attachment A.
We did. I just put it
And,
on.
and what, the way I caught it is you had one of the charts showing the changes you made, and it was 3.094. We don't have that.
3.094?
Yeah, I don't, and Dick doesn't either.
Maybe that's where I got some of the.
We've got 2 copies that starts at the top of 3.110.
Well,
Oh,
This is what I
well,
have.
okay, but
I'm sorry.
again, I don't know why we have 2 copies of A.
I don't either. I have 1 copy, but,
Yeah, you've got the same thing.
I have A, B, and C,
Two
but I do have
copies.
2 copies of
So
A.
my mistake, maybe we have it, maybe we just have 2 copies of it. so.
well, A, I included the matrix because it might have been easier with the home business standards to show how things were changing, but the actual revisions in the code would just be in this document here, and it was page 2 of, which would be 3 pages, or 2 pages in to
That's
the...
item B.
Yeah, it's on page 2. It starts on page 2, where 3.094, we would keep the prohibited uses that are now 1 through 4, but then propose some of the uses that were formerly prohibited to be allowed under the conditional use process. I can give you my copy.
Not sure I clearly understand it, but that's all right.
So we should have 2 identical pages like this in the, now we got 3 because So basically, here's the writing. She just kind of summarized.
Okay,
So any other
this
questions?
document is not the development code.
That's just the matrix.
Sorry, this was a summary chart that was really helpful to the Planning Commission. I included it in case you had looked at this. What you really need is
And that's on
the,
page 2.
you know, I took my packet apart.
The one that
I,
has, Dick, the matrix, so that's really not the development code. This was showing what our current, the columns of current code, and what was being, home businesses allowed outright, and what was conditional use. So it was kind of showing where,
I got that.
it's a
Okay.
summary.
And then page
Yeah.
3 and page 4 is identical.
right, mine, I think it was just a mistake, but the
So
third
that,
and fourth
it
pages.
should be that identical page in this one.
Yeah, I think it's just a mistake. There was additional pages
Oh,
put in.
okay.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
just disregard or pull off the first 2, and then you've got the correct documents. A, B, and C.
Yeah, This is not part
Yeah.
of any exhibit. It was included because it really summarizes Exhibit A. Sorry
Right.
for the confusion.
Yeah. Okay, so is there questions over the language in the code? Any questions, yeah, Rich?
I got heartburn. As you can imagine, I've been looking over my list of customers. Almost 70 customers do welding in, these are people in 973-7322. In the last 2.5 years, these are individual people, these are not businesses. $374,000 worth of gas and wire and that kind of stuff. I further, and then this last weekend, looked at them specifically and, okay, well, what's George doing and what's, They fall into 2 basic categories. One is, it's a sideline business. A couple of them are Lebanon firefighters who have big-time free time, and then they work in blocks, and so they do something else. They have lots of heartburn over this, and the reason is not because they think they shouldn't have to apply by some rule. They don't think they should be able to make noise when their neighbors doesn't. But by the same token, they don't think that their neighbor should be able to make noise that they can't make. What this does is it says, we're going to look at you, groups of people, instead of what your problem is.
Rich, are you kind of deliberating yet? Because we haven't had public testimony yet.
Yeah.
Or you kind of have a question for Ann?
I didn't
Yeah.
cover that one area because I ran off out of room on my slide, but regarding noise, based on input that we had received from someone who will probably testify tonight, who owns a welding business, he suggested that we look at a sustained amount of noise. And so actually the proposal is sustained for more than 10 minutes between the hours of 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. And that is consistent with his suggested language for that, and it also is at 60 decibels. So I think the Planning Commission did a good job of responding to that concern, whether that addresses all of the folks you've heard from, but that is a proposed amendment, because right now there is no offensive noise. Well, what does offensive noise mean? So we were trying to come up with a measurable standard, and that's at the property line.
Question is, what is the current standard for Albany? I mean, do we have a noise standard and a parking standard and a whatever standard? We have that, yes, we do, no, we don't.
Actually, I did that research for the Planning Commission. Sorry to butt in, but the noise standards in the municipal code are very specific to construction activity using a dog barking, a construction activity during certain hours in the evening, and there's nothing about running a business. Of course, there's, domestic violence, but there's nothing specific to home businesses, which is why I think the Planning Commission was willing to put this in. I've got all my notes over here. I was going to shift back over there, but the other was, if you're running like an air gun or something that needs a generator, that there is a regulation about that. It's almost all related to the construction industry, and actually about constructing buildings is in the language, if I remember it correctly. So that was one of the reasons there wasn't anything to address noise.
Time for discussion after we hear from.
So,
Yeah.
any more questions for now?
Okay. All right. Okay, any other questions of Ann?
Well, as long as I can ask them after the public talks.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you, Ann. You gonna say something? Okay, so if anyone wishes to enter an exhibit into the record as part of your testimony, please briefly describe it and then present it to the city clerk. So, let's see. So with the sign up that we had for folks that wanted to speak in favor, the first is Walter Gowell. Gowell, I'm sorry. So yes, if you could come forward and then spell your last name and your state your address for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Walter Gowell, spelled Gowell. My address is P.O. Box 480, McMinnville. I am here on behalf of our client, First Federal Savings and Loan Association of McMinnville, which is a property owner in Albany, owns a 40-acre tract, currently vacant, but subject to various development discussions with city staff by various developers who are looking to purchase the property from our client. There was many development issues were discussed and tentatively resolved with regard to this property in 2011 during a proceeding before this city council, which was very helpful in helping to crystallize discussions with potential developers and try and get this property back into a useful condition. That resulted in a council decision, a council vote that was taken on March 23rd, 2011. Notice of decision was issued on that on March 25th, 2011. And so what brings us to testifying in this public hearing this evening is the interest of First Federal in obtaining an extension. In examining city ordinances, we could not find an extension provision originally, so in contacting city staff in early February, we discovered that this proceeding was ongoing and that this proposal had been made by the Planning Commission and was coming to the council on this date. So we're here in support of the staff's proposed creation of an extension provision for land use approvals. First Federal's situation is such that if the amendment was passed as proposed, it would not include people whose approvals had expired prior to the adoption of an ordinance. We figured we could miss you by as little as a week, or maybe 2 or 3 weeks, depending on when these amendments were adopted. So for that reason, we proposed some language that would make this, make it possible for your decision, should you determine to allow extensions, to apply to anyone who had given a written request for an extension prior to the expiration of their former approval. So that was the first issue, and that was the first change, the first written change that we presented to city staff earlier today. The second issue relates to the number of how long before the extension, the approval would expire, that an extension request needs to be made. And the way the language was written, it just talked about an extension at least 45 days before the expiration date. And so we looked at that and said to ourselves, well, what is the expiration date? And so that, it could have been one of actually 4 days, either the day before or the anniversary date of the date that the council had voted. In our case, that would have been March 23rd, 2011. And I say the date before or the date of because it depends on whether you start counting that day or the next day. Where you end up, do you end up on the 22nd or do you end up on the 23rd? It's not defined. The other thing is that in the notice of decision that the city typically sends out, it notifies people that they have 21 days from the date that the decision becomes final to appeal their decision to LUBA. Now, in my experience as a city attorney for other cities, what that essentially is saying is the notice of decision which goes out is the date that that decision becomes final for the purposes of appeal. That's when the 21 days starts. And so I thought that made sense because it was consistent with the notices that were going out from the city to specify in your amendment that for the purposes of this request for an extension, that the date that would be considered the date of extension, the date of expiration, would be the anniversary date of the date the notice went out. So that was the second of the two suggestions we made, which I think is consistent with the way the city does business at the present time. So with that, enough said. I think your staff did an excellent job presenting the issue. We support the staff's position in this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Any questions? Yeah, Ray?
I noticed we got the small packet.
Yes.
From you. And I see the first item that you addressed, but I don't see any, I'm maybe not reading it properly, about the second issue that you brought up on this paperwork that you provided to us.
If you look down under, on the...
Number 1. Okay.
Yeah, number 1, the last sentence, for the purposes of this subsection, the expiration date shall be...
Oh, notice of decision. Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's the second
That's
issue.
it. Thank you. We're done. Okay, good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So just to clarify,
Yes.
you're happy with the changes that staff has made? They address your issues?
The staff essentially has endorsed the changes that we proposed this morning, and so yes,
Okay.
we're happy with that.
Very good. Don't necessarily understand all the details, just want you to be happy.
Appreciate that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next on the list is Paul Gutowski. Did I say that right?
Yep, Gutowski.
Yep. Gutowski. Well, if it's any Slavic name, then that's easier for me, since that's mine.
My name is Paul Gutowski. I live at 1515 Southwest Park Terrace, and I own Polybuilt Incorporated, and I'm pretty sure you have all my information that I've sent in. I'd just like to say that I can also recommend the changes that the staff and the Planning Commission has come up with regarding home businesses. As far as the noise goes, it would be nice if we could make some more noise than that, but at the same time, I think it does a pretty good job of protecting a business like mine. I would say that I'm probably at times over that, but I've been operating out of my house for going on 7 years now, I think, and so I haven't had any complaints. So I think if a business like mine can operate that way and not have any complaints, I think everybody is happy and compatible and getting along. As far as the people that, like Rich is talking about, I wish they would have showed up and testified and did the work to express their concerns, because if you read through the letters, it kind of feels like I'm not by myself, but at times it has been, because I've sent letters out to a lot of my customers, a lot of my vendors, a lot of my neighbors, and not really, I don't think any of them showed up. So it is what it is. And like I say, I can recommend the changes that we've come up with, and I can say that they're a lot better than what we first started out with. So I like how we all came together and worked it out. So I'm happy.
Okay. Any questions? Yeah, Rich?
So, which is louder, your neighbor's mower or you?
Depends. Depends. But, I mean, the argument, and I've made that argument to...
Just louder?
Which is louder, which is, I mean, a barking dog that can bark legally right now under the city code, they can bark for 10 minutes per hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So obviously, and that's another interesting comment or point is, I called the city of Albany because I was curious to see what the complaints ratio of home businesses was to complaints of dogs and cats. And I think Ann testified or spoke at Planning Commission, they came up with about 20 or maybe a little bit more than that complaints per year regarding home businesses. So I called the City of Albany Police Department, and they couldn't count a whole year, but they counted up the month of January, and they got between 70 and 90 calls because of dogs and cats and complaints. So, I mean, that's kind of the perspective. But typically, if you're a good neighbor, you don't have your dog out barking in the middle of the night for 10 minutes. And if you're a good business owner, you're not out at 8 o'clock at night banging on a 5-gallon drum in your backyard. And so that's really what it comes down to. I'm sure I'm louder than a lawnmower at times, but the argument is, if you're a resident, you're not out mowing your lawn all day long either. You know, you do it for half an hour on Sunday or Saturday or whatever, and that's it.
You do it inside your building with the door closed, or?
No, but, I mean, I know where you're coming from, Rich, and like I say, I made all those arguments, and if you read through all my stuff, I made all those arguments that says...
But not everybody has heard that.
Well, to date, if I added up all the time and money and resources I've spent, it's probably about $4,000, maybe $5,000. I've spent defending my business and defending up till now. And I think, I mean, it's kind of an endless argument. I mean, yeah, I can, as a resident, I can go mow my lawn. As a home business, I can go mow my lawn, but it better be done in 10 minutes. Otherwise, I got to stop for however long and then finish it to be within this regulation. And that's the truth. I would like to be able to make noise all day long, but I'm the only one up here telling you that. There's 14,000 other residences that.
Grass mowing constitute a business noise? I can't believe that.
I can't comment on how many times we've ever had an enforcement issue with someone cutting the grass, whether it was business or residential, but I've never heard of one, so I don't know.
Well,
Maryland is
it's
our
expected.
expert. Yeah, people
Expected.
mow their lawns, and whether
Right.
they're businesses or whether they're...
Right.
Okay, any other questions?
No.
All right, thank you. Okay, next for in favor would be Richard Berger.
Hello, everyone. I guess I don't have to stand very close to that. It's Richard Berger. I am the Government Affairs Director for the Willamette Association of Realtors. Our office is 615 Waverly Drive. I represent around 300 realtors who live, work, and do business in and around the city of Albany. I have some written testimony which I'll hand to the clerk, which basically summarizes what I'm going to say today. I've been a part of this process since the beginning. I attended nearly all of the Business Ready Task Force meetings, and our association supports the recommendations that are coming to you. The vast majority of them are pretty simple changes that are reasoned, straightforward, and will make it easier for businesses and landowners as well as city staff to administer the code. We also want to thank the Business Ready Task Force, the Planning Commission, you guys, and city staff for the hard work. This has been 2 years of work. That's a lot of work, and it will improve the business climate. So we really want to thank all of you and thank the mayor. She chaired that committee and worked very hard on it. So that's all I have, and I'll submit my written testimony over there.
All right, any questions, Richard? Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for attending those meetings, too.
Also, I think those two name tags are flipped.
Again.
Oh, they are. Good
Well, I'm
catch.
sure wouldn't want Bill to get
Thank you.
Good catch, thank you, Richard. Okay, so the next person that signed up was just as neutral, and that was Dean McDaniel. Okay, Dean, Mr. McDaniel, if you can come to the microphone, because we need to have it picked up on our tape recorder. And then if you can state your name, spell your last name, and furnish your address.
Yeah, I got this here slip here, and they changed the thing here, and we got the water table, what is it?
Okay, so will you state your name into the
Wetland.
microphone?
Yeah, they set this out, and it's a wetland, put wetland on this. And I don't know what you're supposed to do about that, if does it affect your
Okay.
buildings, or?
So seeing your address that you signed up on, could you state your address, Mr. McDaniel?
Ma'am?
Can you state your address where you
Yeah,
live?
34560 Highway 99 East at Tangent.
Okay,
What's his name?
and it's Dean McDaniel?
Yes.
Is that it?
Right.
Okay, and then you're sending the property, where's the property at?
Yeah.
Where's it located?
So it's, all I know, they said that it was, got this says it's wetland, or whatever you'll call it. And I don't know whether you changing stuff or what have you.
Okay, I don't know if that pertains to what our agenda item is here for, over our legislative code changes, but how about if Mr. Hare goes out and talks to you in the hall? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. He will go and find out what we can do to help you on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, and that was it, who signed up on the list. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on these changes? Yes, Christine?
I'm Christina Sullivan. I live at 3383 Hillwood Road Southeast in Jefferson, but I have a business here in town at 1260 Price Road Southeast in Albany. I should have signed up, but I'm ecstatic with all the changes that are happening with the code, with the parking, with the signs, and so that's why I didn't sign up, but I should have signed up, just to say I'm in favor of these changes. I have suggested some other changes, but everything happens in time, and if we're going to do some other changes, you know, we have time for that too, but I'm very pleased with what is happening. Just wanted to know if you had any questions in regard to the letter that I submitted.
Do you have any questions? No?
No
Okay,
questions?
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you very much.
Looking forward to when's your coffee shop going to get open?
It should open by June, I hope.
Oh, well, good. Oh, boy, we've got our great concerts coming up and busy times, so, great. Okay, anyone else that would like to comment? Okay, not seeing anyone. So, does staff want to respond to any testimony?
No.
Okay. With that, I will declare the public hearing closed at 8:06 PM. And council, you have an ordinance that's on page 4 and 5. Would you like the city attorney to do the first reading, then have discussion, or would you like to discuss it first?
Do the first reading and then discuss it.
First reading, okay.
An ordinance amending ordinance number 4441, which adopted the City of Albany Development Code and zoning map by amending the development code text relating to economic development, home businesses, planned developments, and signs, and adopting findings and declaring an emergency.
Okay. You want to move for the ordinance to be read a second time? Is that what you want?
Name only? So moved?
Title only.
Do we have to vote on the discussion on the first reading?
Right, for the first
You
reading?
did the first reading.
Yeah, we just did the first reading.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you need to have a move to be able to have it, the ordinance read in a second time in title only. And then we vote on that.
I have some discussion here.
Yeah, we are. Just, we have a,
You want a second reading and vote on it and then have a discussion?
no, usually then if you want well, do you want the second reading, then discussion is what we always do.
Read second time in title only.
Second time in title only.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed, same sign. Okay, now second reading, then we'll discuss it.
An ordinance amending ordinance number 4441, which adopts the City of Albany Development Code and zoning map by amending the development code text relating to economic developments, home business, planned developments, and signs, adopting findings and declaring an emergency.
Okay, now what would you like to discuss? Rich?
Okay. To my way of thinking, if you're going to restrict something, what the problem is what you deal with, not who's causing it. Example, if we are driving down the road and there's no place to park, it's because someone has taken all the parking spots. So if it is reasonable to restrict the parking, it should not be restricted for Floyd, but not for Ray. It should be everyone has the same set of rules. And so I think this is the wrong place to put restrictions on parking or noise or whatever else where it comes to small business, because we should change our city code on noise to say, okay, it's reasonable to have however many decibels it is for however long, and then everybody gets to have the same set of rules. As it is right now, if this were to pass. My cousins, one of which works on cars as a vocation and the other one works on cars as an avocation, one would have to jump through hoops, the other would not, for doing the same exact thing. Discrimination. mean, we wouldn't think of doing that other ways. We wouldn't say, well, gee, folks with large families use a lot of parking, so let's have people with large families come down and jump through some hoops. I mean, someone would suggest that, and they'd get taken out back and spanked. This is kind of the equivalent of racial profiling for business. It's saying, because you're a business, you're liable to cause trouble, so let's restrict you. And I don't think that's right. I think the place to do this is by changing our code to say what is specifically. Man, no one that I spoke to in my businesses said, we think we ought to be able to make a bunch of noise. No one said that we should be able to take up all the parking. But when you require some people to jump through hoops for it and not somebody else, it's discriminatory. So that, for my way of thinking, the home business portion of this should be taken out. And we should deal with it on the basis of parking and noise and whatever else.
But isn't that what we're doing
You're not dealing with parking?
with the
For
home
business?
businesses for the
Yeah.
code? That's what we have in the code, is over parking, and that's what we have over noise.
For home businesses.
Right.
No, have it for everybody, not just home businesses.
Oh, you mean for residential, or you mean for?
Yeah, if it's whatever it is in residential, if you have a business in your area, and someone can't tell that you're doing something, it shouldn't really be, if you're not affecting anybody, it shouldn't be anybody else's business. I mean, if you're not using too much parking, if you're not making too much noise, because if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and Paul is beating on a can, he is making noise, waking people up. There's no difference between being woken up by him beating on a can or his next door neighbor's children who have a garage band who decide they're going to play a Hard Day's Night at 125 decibels.
But we do have that in our code, too, that's not permitted. I mean, I'm not understanding, Rich, what you're trying to say. Yeah.
Well, I think I agree with Rich, and the way I'm looking at it is that I know how to weld, but I'm not a welder for a living, and I decide I want to build a boat trailer in my garage, I can weld all day long. Yet the gentleman that spoke that has a welding business in his house is limited to 10 minutes. So I think Rich is exactly right. You're discriminating against an individual only because they have a business.
Yep, Jim.
The core of zoning is discriminating. It is saying certain uses, certain businesses are allowed in one zone, but they're not allowed in another. If you wanted to take the point to an extreme, you'd say, why wouldn't we want to allow business, why wouldn't we do away with the distinction between commercial and residential zones? Because we don't want to prejudge that a business will be incompatible with its residential neighbor. Part of the problem is we don't have the resources to enforce in every case after the offense occurs. So you try to set up zoning to make discriminatory decisions. Discrimination is nothing but a choice based on a classification. And the classification can be residential or commercial. So one of the concerns I have, if you carry this too far, you're going to, why would you bother to have a distinction between a residential and commercial zone?
Right.
Do I understand it correctly that if we pass this, that the existing businesses that are already there would be effectively grandfathered in, and we're talking about future businesses potentially coming in, or would we say ipso facto, you're already here, so therefore you got to leave?
You can't make the noise.
Yeah, Wes?
We have had more stringent regulations on home occupations. We currently have, because you haven't changed the code yet, we have more stringent regulation of home occupations than what is being proposed. That was one of the reasons for the changes, was to try and ease some of the restrictions on home occupations that we've had. You know, not everybody would agree that, I'm not commenting on the specifics of a particular or a section of these regulations. I'm just saying in general, they're a lot less restrictive than what we've had.
True, but by the same token, on this particular one, now we're arbitrarily saying a couple of very specific kinds of businesses are now pinpointed and said, because you do that kind of businesses, now you're not going to be allowed.
Well,
But and it's over a certain decibel, though, isn't it? Ann, you
Yeah.
can go up to a certain decibel, which is the same as if you're in an industrial zone, you still have noise regulations in an industrial zone.
So that, basically what Rich is saying, if you're talking about, if it's the noise the issue, so you address that problem, you don't say what it is that's causing the noise.
yeah, well, the issue, I mean, noise is one element, potential element, and what Jim said is absolutely right. The problem that we're up against, I mean, you could kind of make that argument and say, well, we don't need zoning laws at all, or and we should only, like dog issues. This came up when we were dealing with dogs. We have a limit on the number of dogs that people can have. Well, we shouldn't be regulating the number of dogs. We should only be regulating the impacts of those dogs. The problem with that approach is that it can be really hard to prove how many dogs someone has, or not, excuse me, not how many dogs somebody has, how those dogs are behaving at a given time. Somebody has to document that they've done it. Likewise, with some of the external impacts of businesses, it can be really hard to prove that when, you're trying to deal with it in a courtroom. So, this isn't a new development. Zoning codes have been around for a long time, and home occupation regulations have been around for a long time in cities large and small across the United States. Now, I think the question before you is not, at least I would hope, is not whether or not you should have home occupation regulation. It's, are these regulations appropriate? And I think it's instructive that the committee worked for a long time with a lot of people and did listen, as we heard from Mr. Guskowski, was it? I'm sorry, Mr. Gutowski, I apologize. And I mean, to me, that was a really good example of people who were pretty far apart at the beginning on where where the starting point was, working together and coming to a point where everybody could say, okay, we can live with these rules. The other thing I would say is that, enforcement of any rule, whether it's a traffic rule, a drop barking dog rule, it requires a certain level of discretion. And I'm not saying, I don't want Jim to bounce out of his chair and tell me that we only, because I'm not saying we only enforce on complaint, but I am saying we do enforce with judgment. And I think our judgment in general has been pretty good. We try and recognize the intent of the code, and I think the intent here is to make sure that the external impacts are not going to create problems for either party. So, for example, we're not going to go out and hit a business because they're mowing their lawn, unless they're doing it at 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe. So, just some context. And again, my recommendation would be to focus on the exact changes that are being proposed and say, okay, yeah, we can live with these, or no, we can't.
And actually, and I even think some of we even compared with other cities, too. So our code changes are actually making it more friendly for home businesses than what we currently have, so.
That's true, but the point that I make here is, you didn't hear me complain about setbacks or signs or, you heard me complain about one thing that my customers are going to have a problem with, and some of them have a pretty good sized problem with it. Now, it is being treated differently than their next door neighbor, and that's what bothers them. It would bother me. In fairness, I started my business in my home when it was in Corvallis. I made noise, and I had one guy who was complaining about me making noise, and he complained right up to the point where his wife was having a problem with a guy, and I walked over and talked to him, and from then on, I was 12 feet tall. It is, you get along with your neighbors, and, we all do that. You go down Commercial Way, they're driving ATVs down the road, and that is not technically legal. However, nobody there cares because there are people who say, hey, you know, there aren't people walking around looking with all this activity, so it works out. Issue is basic fairness. I mean, when one of my cousins can and the other one can't, and they're doing exactly the same thing, it's not like, you know, we're saying, oh, well, you're making 20 decibels above this and you're making 50 decibels above this. It's exactly the same thing. That's the issue. And I just think it's discriminatory.
Well, I'm afraid I'm kind of a noisy neighbor. I like to burn, I've got a wood stove and I like to burn some wood. So I do some chainsawing, I do some chopping, and I'm sure I go above the decibel level. But I'm not in the business where I'm out there chainsawing 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And I think that's the difference here. That a home business, if they have a noisy business and they're doing it all the time, every day of the business week,
They're not doing
I think
that.
that's, now I exceed decibel levels, but I don't exceed the decibel levels all day, or even every day. It's just once in a while.
Well, then complain about the decibel levels.
Well, how can
Complain about-
how can you chop a piece of wood and not make noise?
That's not my point. My point
my
is,
point.
we should worry about if there's 110 decibels at something, it doesn't make any difference whether it is Marilyn making the noise or if it's Ann that's making the noise is being made.
I'm not making.
Should have
I'm not
one
make-
standard
Can I answer
for
you?
noise.
Yeah.
My point isn't that I should be allowed to make noise and the other guy shouldn't. It's that I don't make noise on a regular basis all the time.
And you make the code say that.
But I think it
Well, you do.
is addressed in here, though, Rich, so I'm really not quite understanding. To me, if you're trying to say not to have any regulations over home businesses, is that what
No.
you're saying? So,
You don't,
so what would you, okay, for in the code, what would you want changed?
in this code, I would do nothing about noise. I would do noise in the noise code. You can't make more than 60 whatever decibels at your property line, or if that's not reasonable, whatever is reasonable. So it's one set of standards for everybody.
Well, and I do know we have in our code under industrial uses. So then are you saying to change the code so all classifications of all zoning
No,
is not to
in a
exceed?
residential area, if it's unreasonable to have 70 decibels more than 10 minutes, you say 70 decibels, 10 minutes, that's the maximum you can have in a residential area. And when you're a business and you make that and violate it, it's a problem. And when you're an individual and you make that and you violate it, it's a problem. So everyone sets by the same set of rules. I mean, what we seem to have a problem with is people making money.
I don't think that's
Well,
it.
that's exactly what it says. It says that you can have, well, wherever it is here,
For compensation.
for compensation.
Well, that's what the planning commission added. That wasn't originally in the plans from the task force. That's what the planning commission added. To make a difference between the hobbyist to the person making a profit. Because
That's
somebody
the
just
problem.
wanted to do a hobby. They made that distinction between the two. The original and out of the task force was just pertaining to the noise, so.
So you're giving the hobby person a break, is what you're doing.
Giving the hobby person the break, but I mean, the council could take that out, and so it applies to the hobbyist and the business. Bessie?
I think Jim had his hand up, so if he wants to go first.
Well, I was just curious, we're making a lot of assumptions. There's not an awful lot of decibel limits in the code. Ann, help me out here, because I don't want to misstate the facts. Other than this proposal, in the current proposal, it's subjective, and it talks about unreasonable noise. And the effort of the committee was to provide an objective standard at a relatively, well, I don't know whether 60 is high or low.
That's conversation.
Well, I'm not from, I don't,
That's maybe yours. Mine's probably higher than that.
never mind. So, Ann, are there other places in the land use code where we're specifically relying on decibel limits?
In Article 9, under the environmental standards, it's 917, page 917, 9.440. We have adopted the DEQ standards for noise into our code, which are about industrial and commercial uses. And depending on the type of business and the type of area, their decibel levels are 55, 60, and 50, 45. I mean, there's a range, but
But the thing I'd like to make clear is that when we use, and Ann, correct me again if I'm wrong, when we use decibels, what we're trying to do is give design standards that people can build to. When we put decibels in as a general noise ordinance, if we currently, our general noise ordinance in the city doesn't have a decibel limit. It talks to unreasonable noise. It talks to noise generated by equipment that is out of repair or unmuffled, the lawnmower with no muffler, for example. If you start trying to do all enforcement based on decibels, it's nice and objective. The problem is it's awfully difficult for a homeowner to file a complaint against his neighbor. He doesn't have a decibel meter. He can't get the city code enforcement officer out there at 3 in the morning. And so the decibel standard, you need to understand, if that's what we're going to do, is going to be very problematic from an enforcement standpoint. But
But it's been used. I mean, I
Yes,
do know of neighborhood issues, and I know of over industry that the city has gone out in the past and take decibel readings, so.
And it's especially useful when we're designing or helping to determine construction standards or design standards, setbacks, things of that nature, so that the idea is to have a zoning code that gets people building and operating businesses in a way that doesn't create the problem in the first instance, is infinitely more efficient than our trying to go in and regulate, say, everything's fine until it's not. The vast majority, for 95% of the people in the United States, there's no need for a criminal code. It's the 5%. I'm sorry, I wanted you to understand that we don't have general noise levels, for example, in residential zones. We don't have a decibel level we use for evaluating our neighbors' activities. We could put that in, it would just be difficult for us to actually enforce.
Bessie?
Yeah. Ray asked a question I was going to ask, and it was never answered. Are the current small businesses, home businesses, are they going to be grandfathered in?
That was my question I asked.
Yeah, and it wasn't answered. And so, if they're not grandfathered in, it's just like, kicking them in the rear. It's like,
This is
okay, we
a
don't want
loosening
you.
of restrictions, not a tightening of restrictions.
Right. So
Some of
actually,
it,
they
some
don't
of
want
it's
to be.
tightening.
They
Yeah,
wouldn't want to be
exactly.
grandfathered in then, Bessie, because if they are not in compliance. So say if they have 2 employees, our code now says 1 employee. So by the changes, then they'd be able to have their 2
Yeah, but they're not all that way.
But you're right, the noise is a change from a subjective standard to an objective standard, you're correct.
Yeah, and so I really don't, there's a lot of it in here. For one thing, we got a lot of material that we had to cover in a short period of time. This is very important. I wish we'd have had another couple weeks to go over it and really, so I'm not even sure.
You're not required to.
Vote no on adopting it.
You could have a second reading. You're not required to do it tonight.
Well, and that's why I'm saying, because there is a lot in here, and there's a lot more questions
You
that I
remember,
have.
From the task force, we had the joint meeting with the council and the planning commission. All of us were together and went through the code changes. And then we've also had the open houses, and we've also had another joint planning commission meeting over the code changes. So this has been in front of the council for the past year.
Because it's the first time we've had the whole thing to read.
Exactly.
So, well, no, you've had the whole document. It's just now it's totally in the code format.
Different,
That's the changes.
because it's been amended.
There's
So,
been a few
yeah.
changes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
there's
just
been a few
don't think there's
changes.
a rush, is what I'm trying to say.
And in fairness to Councilor Johnson, I'm not sure I directly answered her question. This code has changed, does not have a provision to grandfather in,
That's
and
not right.
it does not have a provision to make the objective 60 decibel standard not apply to everyone. It would apply to everyone. pre-existing and prospective.
That's not right.
Bessie, but I do think it's important to make the distinction that an existing business under the current code, the one we're talking about changing, could be in violation probably more easily, found to be in violation more easily under the existing standard than under the standard that's proposed. Let's take an example. If you're a business right now, the standard that's applied to you is an unreasonable noise. So you could get a ticket or a citation for violating the code because you're making an unreasonable amount of noise. And you tell me what that is. Under the new code, there is a standard that says if you're making this much noise, you potentially could get a ticket. So
It's what you have it compared to.
yeah, exactly. So the point is that when we say there's no grandfathering, that's because the standard is a more objective standard than what we've had in the past. Now, you can say, I don't like this new standard, and I think that's a fair thing, but I don't think you can say that the new standard is somehow going to be more restrictive or more difficult for businesses to comply with than the old standard.
But it may change if they've never been bothered before, they've gone along, and done their business and really nothing's happened. Now all of a sudden,
I don't think the proposed code change creates that opportunity. I mean, that same opportunity, if they've been going along fine under the existing code, then they're probably going to go along fine under the new code.
You're not going to have noise police out patrolling for 60
Not unless you
decibels.
choose to fund them.
There was one business that was in Ward 3 that called me up, and they were worried about the changes. The current code, they're not in compliance. They're wanting these changes because then now they are in compliance. So, I mean, there's many businesses that were out there, that home businesses that wanted these changes, because they want to be in compliance.
I agree.
So,
For the majority
yeah.
of the places, it's probably going to be a good thing. The thing that bothers me, that's going to cause me to vote no on this, is that you are now, which you did not have before, specifying two very specific types of home businesses, which are, in fact, businesses and hobbies, and that is the auto and the painting type thing. And because you have named them and carved them out as a distinction, as opposed to just the generalized, everything applying across the board to everybody, that's what bothers me.
yeah, me too.
Well, I mean, you do have the option of changing from what the planning commission wanted and take out the hobby. That was added. That wasn't from the Business Ready Task Force. That was the hobby.
I think Ann has
That was
important
added.
clarification.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I just want to clarify. Currently, there is a list of prohibited uses, and the first one is auto body repair and painting. The proposal from the Planning Commission is that you consider that use as a conditional use. Right now, it's prohibited. There is no allowance to do that at all. The one allowance now, because we're distinguishing between occupations, we're switching to businesses and hobbies, trying to help the hobbyist out. The language they added for compensation through the conditional use process. Currently, that's not an allowed use.
Okay,
But I think that I'm hearing concerns about the noise standard. There doesn't have to be a change to that.
doesn't bother me.
If that's the one area of concern, maybe there's a bigger issue. I don't know that that's where a lot of our complaints are coming from. It's from the other measurables, and I think a lot of work has gone into this for that one standard, which is what I've heard most about. The complaints we get are traffic, parking, outside display. Those are the ones that are most frequent in my mind. We were trying to make things measurable, but
So are you
we
saying
let that
that the car hobby stuff is okay?
They would be, could it be a conditional use?
Yes.
Quack, quack, their grandfather
Do I have to have a conditional use for a hobby?
no. What we're trying to do now, you do. No. Right now, working on cars as an occupation, which could include hobbies. I mean, it says home occupations, but the way it's described, it seems to imply hobbies as well. So now the proposal is hobbies are excluded from these standards.
That's what I thought.
As a hobby, you would not. For compensation, you would not be able to work on cars. I mean, unless you did it through CU. Right now, you can't work on cars at all
As a business.
as a business.
So
Yeah.
I can fix my own car, but I can't fix Ray's if he's gonna pay me for it.
Right.
Right.
Under the current code.
Current code, it's
Current code
prohibited.
is
If
more
it changes,
restrictive.
it won't be. You'll be able to do it.
With the new code, I can't fix anything?
No, you can. The current code, you can't. That's why these are
You
actually
can fix your own, but you
messing up
can't
the
fix
rules.
his unless you jump through the hoops.
For money.
Yeah.
Or do it for free.
Right.
But you can get a conditional use to do that.
Correct.
Under the new
But
code.
you have to
Under
jump
the
through
new
the hoops
code.
to get
Under
it.
the new code.
Right.
But
I
it's
mean,
prohibited.
there are,
currently.
if you look at my customer base, of the 60-some odd who do it, there are about 31 who do it for money that they get to begin with, and others is somewhat more nebulous. It's, oh gee, I'm going to work on the car, and when I get done, I get paid for it. But, understand, I'm the smallest guy in town, so that 60 is probably 300.
Okay. But under the new proposal, they are going to have the opportunity to get a conditional use and and still allow it to happen.
But their next-door neighbor doesn't.
Right, so council, can you turn to page 70? I think that might help. So 3.125, if you look at the strikeout, it said prohibited uses. The following uses are prohibited as home occupations, which lists auto body repair and painting. That's current, so the changes now are home businesses requiring conditional use permit would be home body repair and painting for compensation. So currently, a home business could not do auto body and repair or painting, but with the new rules would be they can go through the conditional use process.
How about if I'm not a business, but I'm just doing it once
Have at it.
every 5
Then
years?
you can go at it. That's
at it.
that's just a hobby.
Even if I sell the car?
Yeah. So, I mean, it might
No.
look like these are more strict, changes, but they're not on that.
Manager says yes.
So,
We gotta keep you as a manager, Wes.
so Bessie?
Yeah, and then there was another part, someone else, I think had kind of alluded to it, but it's where it says no more than 3 customer or client vehicles are permitted on the property or in the right-of-way at one time. So if you have a home business, you have 2 high school kids and you both work, you have like more cars and stuff. This is going to restrict families from parking
Currently,
on
it's
their own
one.
property.
Our current code is 1 car. This is going up to 3.
It's more just unenforced regulations is what we're doing,
I mean, I guess the council can not do any changes to the home business and keep it as
No, I mean,
current,
it's just-
but it's
I mean,
going
we're
to
just-
not alleviate a lot of the problems and make it more strict than what the proposed changes are.
And who's going to tell if
Unless
there's
you
3
also
more
decide we want to
deliveries
have
at the house?
some kind of a noise code that is uniform in residential areas, and have a parking code that, I mean, it can be something really pretty simple. I mean, you don't own the parking spots in front of your house. However, if you had something that essentially said, if you're using more parking than what's in front of your house, you have to make arrangements or something.
I do believe in our residential code, we do have about noise in our code, or it's a municipal code.
Yeah.
Municipal code has it. I've had that come to me before, and it's for after hours. You're not to be having noise on your property.
Amplified
code.
paging systems, and then I
Yeah,
think
so
domestic
we do
violence.
have in our municipal code.
But not for general operation, we don't. In
Right, and it doesn't say.
There's something about amplified
7
paging systems, sound systems, and then I think under a nuisance, I think with domestic violence, there might be something, but I looked, and that was one of the reasons why they thought it would be okay to put a decibel level, but, this standard, the noise standard, I think I'm hearing you don't want to amend that unless you want to look at something that applies to everybody. The other standards are ones that try to address some of the impacts that we have heard complaints about. Our problem right now is that our language is so subjective, it's hard to enforce about complaints about excessive traffic. And so we were trying to come up with what generates the traffic. It's employees and, maybe customers. So we were looking at those, and we compared ourselves to other cities, and this is the most generous code I've seen, what we're proposing compared to other city standards. The number of employees, parking, allowing on-site sales. A lot of communities don't even allow on-site sales, for example. So on balance, I think this is a better code. If you look at this matrix, the blue column on the far right, you can still exceed all of the measurable standards pretty much with a conditional use permit. Our problem enforcing on the backside is that neighbors are already upset. They don't really want to attend the hearing, which is set after they've complained. It's uncomfortable for them, and it doesn't end up getting resolved in a way that is good for either party. And we thought the conditional use process would get at this before a business gets established. So that doesn't mean you couldn't exceed the proposed measurable standards, but we thought that there should be some neighborhood input so that the business stays compatible with the community.
Could I ask, what is the cost of a conditional use permit?
Well, we would be talking to you in a council work session about what the cost would be for this specific conditional use permit, and we're talking about coming to you in April. There are a couple of fee-related changes related to this, but we wanted to see what got adopted first.
Do you have an idea, ballpark?
I think our staff recommendation was going to be between $400 and $750.
That's just
As a
what a small
business
business
expense?
owner needs or
Well, I
a
mean, that's fairly low for a development expense to get set up a business downtown or in a new building. It's a lot more costly. We're trying to come up with ways to allow businesses to stay at home where they don't have to worry about the cost to lease a space, but at some point, you fit into a neighborhood and you don't. We're trying to figure out where that balance is.
One of the testimonies that we heard too was from small businesses that were locating in commercial zones, which is where, of course, businesses are generally expected to locate, and pointing out that there were people operating in residential zones, nominally home businesses, that were not having to pay for the additional cost of locating in a commercial zone, and not having to pay for the kinds of permitting and so on, plus not to mention the higher costs that you pay in a commercial zone. So there was, the feeling there was, well, how can, you've got one standard for me, but you've got another standard for a business that's competing against me. And they didn't feel that that was fair. So, again, I mean, unless you want, and of course, the other problem is that we don't have complete discretion on whether or not we have a zoning code. There are state land use standards that our zoning code has to meet. So I don't think, I can't recommend to you that you say, well, we're going to do away with the zoning code, because you can't do it. But those are some of the issues you run into.
So if you kept it as is over the noise piece that's in the code, it would stay as there is no offensive noise. And then that's where it's very subjective, and you can have one neighbor complaining, and just if they hear something for even 60 seconds. This way it defines it more, it gives that business a little bit more, being able to operate without having a neighbor complain over any type of noise that they'd feel is offensive. So, Rich?
Couple of things. It's obvious there's a whole lot of folks who've never gone into business. Most business does not pay any better than working for wages. Most of it. Most business fails in the first 5 years. 90% fails in the first 5 years, and it is because they don't have any money. That's how come they fail. 95% of all business fails in the first 10 years. And it generally is because they have, they're almost always underfunded. You take $400 from somebody who is trying to get started, that's, it's a noose around their neck. The reason they're at home is because they can't afford to go out there. Most of the time it's because they lost their job. That is the single first biggest impetus to go into business, is because Hewlett-Packard laid you off. I shouldn't pick on Hewlett-Packard, but somebody laid you off and you now, it's 1982 and there are no jobs. So there's something you found you can do. When you have a subjective system, and I understand that the current is subjective, but it is always compared to what? So if Paul is making noise and his neighbor objects, what happens is, well, what other noise am I making? So I'm beating on something and that's a noise. If that is compared to silence, that's a big deal. But it's not compared to silence, it's compared to someone who is mowing their lawn or out there, or kids screaming in the backyard. It is what you're doing compared to what you expect to hear. I mean, it's like the lady a few days ago who complained about the noise she was afraid of with a bottle redemption facility. She was 2.5 blocks from that, only she was 1 block away from 20 trains a day. She didn't hear the 20 trains because she was used to it. Subjective is always subjective, that's just it.
Well,
having a specific standard that everyone has to agree to is fair. Having one that only that side of the dais has to come up with is something else.
So, Rich, the one thing that I have seen, I mean, for many years, over and over, I've had many complaints over neighborhoods having problems with some home businesses. And I did have a business for 14 years. And I had my business in the home for a while. So I made sure that I wasn't going to be offensive to my neighbors. Have we put up with other neighbors with issues? Oh, yeah. I mean, I've had a past neighbor that was very offensive with noise late at night and storing quite a bit of supplies in his around his house. So if it wasn't for our code, we would have had to been living with that, and then that affects our quality of life. I had another neighbor complaining about somebody that was repairing cars and painting in their backyard. We had another neighbor one time that was doing cars, and we could hear the air compressor at 3 in the morning. And when our houses are only 8 feet from the fence line, you're close to that other person's garage.
If you have a standard that is the same for everybody, then it's the same for everybody.
You have to have in your code, and you've got to be able to make it where it's our quality of life in our neighborhoods. And if we didn't have a code, you're going to be making people's lives miserable and driving people out of their neighborhood just because of one person that's not really complying with the rules. And if you don't have rules, then they don't have to comply with anything. But I have seen over the years so many issues that have come forward as complaints from people that have home businesses. And there's many, many home businesses that are wonderful. They fit in great with the neighborhood, and we're very supportive of home businesses. But there's always somebody that will not really be that friendly of a neighborhood, and you have to have it in your code to be able to have any enforcement.
Great, have it in the code. Have it apply to everybody. Everybody. If you don't like 110 decibels, make it illegal to make 110 decibels.
We can do that. We can do that to everyone then, if that's what you think is a solution. But we do have that for noise in residential neighborhoods. We have it in industrial zones.
If it's already in place, we don't need another one. And if it isn't in place, I suggest we put one in place.
But to change another part of our code, then we have to go through another legislative process. So right now, we're dealing with this part of this code.
This is discrimination.
So, okay, then
They're
you
going
want
to
to just keep
discriminate,
it as...
or we're not, one or the
You want
other.
to keep it as offensive noise, and then somebody could be moving into a neighbor next to Mr. Gutowski and say, I don't like hearing his, that's offensive, and wanting us to enforce it. But in other words, if he can be able to prove that, he's not exceeding that 60 decibel, then that gives him some protection. But I mean, it's, no matter what, there's going to be home businesses that will not like the changes, and there's going to be home businesses that will like the changes. But bottom line, these changes are a lot less restrictive than the current code.
Except in these particular areas.
No, I don't think so.
Wes?
I think Bessie was.
Oh, Bessie?
Yeah, I was going to say, I myself would like to do some more research on this, and it sounds like maybe we all kind of need to do some more. And so, since there's no deadline on this, I mean, it's not like a land use or anything like that, right? Correct, Jim?
No, you do not
Okay.
have a time constraint.
And so, I would move to table this till another meeting. That,
All you have to do is vote no
Hmm?
on our vote. don't we?
Vote no on the vote.
One vote carries it over automatically. Didn't it?
Didn't you already vote to read it a second time? You've
Second
already
time.
done that.
We're on
That
second
was my
time.
point of my question, and we moved forward without having.
Yeah,
yeah, I
we read the
know,
second
that was
time.
wrong. We shouldn't have done that.
So, well, it's too late now. We read the second reading, but
Well,
you can...
Then the motion to, Bessie said, if she wants to hold it over, is a motion to delay to a date specific. You're tabling it, and Robert's
Yeah,
rules said you
I
can
would
do
move
that.
to table it till,
No, we junk the whole thing at this point?
No.
No, that's not the issue. There's a motion to table. The
Take
motion
precedent.
should have to a date certain. So is there, the next meeting, do you have a date in mind?
what kind of agenda do we have?
You do
for the
have some
next-
people that are
Yeah.
wanting this to be adopted, too, that are...
I did, myself would like at least a couple of weeks to go a little bit further into it, and,
Well, it may not be helpful. Both Wes and I are going to be gone at the next meeting, and
I think that would be a good time to discuss this.
I think in fairness, you might want to consider moving it to a different meeting.
And that
than
would be
the next
fine.
one.
And I'll second Bessie's motion, and I'll tell you why. It's floating around, and it's kind of information overload. Jim's trying to point out some things that are in the municipal code, and trying to chime in. Wes is, I'm hearing conflicting testimony. It'd kind of be nice to understand clearly what's stated now in terms of businesses and how this would change, as well as what's stated now for the regular Joe on the street, like Rich is saying. Because I'm getting the impression that there are definitely two different standards. Now, in my example before where I said, I'm not a welder, so I can make all the noise I want making a boat trailer, like Dick pointed out to me, he says, well, yeah, but you're only making one trailer. The other guy down the street is making them for a living every day. So I get that. But Rich has some valid points on the noise, I think.
I think so too.
What we could do, if you wanted to table it, you need to complete the motion before there's really a second, because you need to table it to a date certain. My recommendation would be a meeting 2 meetings from now.
Yes.
Next meeting, that would give staff 2 weeks. If you like, we would try to draw together some of the codes we have on noise. For example, I could get you all copies of our general unnecessary noise ordinance, and could pull together the sections in other parts of the development code where we have noise standards. I don't think there's a need for a staff report on that at this point, but we could make a point of having those packets of the ordinances to hand out to you at the next meeting. In fairness, Sean, this will be Sean Kidd's first council meeting, and I would just as soon not put him into that. And he needs Wes to guide him. So I would suggest you actually finish up and make a decision 2 meetings from now,
Okay.
and then you'd have that information Bill is seeking.
Yes, I move to table this till the April 9th City Council's meeting.
Second.
Regular meeting.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
And if you think of other things that you want us to give you for your considerations, we will do that. We will, because this is a legislative hearing, you're not bound by the same rules that would apply in a quasi-judicial, so I'm not concerned that you've asked questions, especially where you want to see codes. You can take administrative notice of your codes anyway. Those aren't evidence.
We still have some more questions about this in the hearing that we got going now.
You can always ask, yes, you're required to have a public hearing in a legislative context. You've done that. You will be able to continue to ask questions of staff, and we can provide
Can we do
you.
it now, so the
Of
staff
course.
can answer those questions too?
Absolutely, absolutely. But, well, I'm sorry, no, you can't. The motion to table is a non-debatable motion.
Right.
So
So that tables the whole thing.
It's done.
it tables the whole thing.
For this
I
meeting.
probably would've voted no.
Well, you haven't voted on it yet.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, you did? I'm sorry.
Well,
No, I got lost.
Well, actually, I only heard a few yeses. Do you want to do a roll call on that motion?
Point of order, I didn't hear any no votes.
No.
There was no no's? I only heard a few yeses, yeah.
Hey,
Can we
non.
unofficially ask questions, well, I guess I can ask questions when it comes my turn as business from the council, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask my questions then.
Okay. Okay,
If
all
Ian's
right.
still here.
I'll stay.
All right, so that item's been tabled, folks, and thank you. And next is business from the public. Anyone here that'd like to bring an item forward? Okay, not seeing anyone. Okay, next, that item is a resolution on page 145, and this is authorizing new terms for Two Helping Hands Homeless Shelters loan. And council, got questions on that?
Move adoption of the resolution.
Second.
Okay. Motion's been made. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Next is adoption of the consent calendar. If there isn't any items that you'd like to have pulled off this evening, I'll entertain a motion.
Move for adoption of consent calendar.
I'd like to pull off 3,
Three.
D3.
I'll make a motion for adoption of the consent calendar with the exception of item number 3.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, Ray will second that since he'd already made the motion. But, okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, item number 3. Bessie, number on page 152.
It's, again, it's about parking, and the, I want to make sure this is the one, I'm sorry. Is this where we're restricting parking for the parole and probation? Yeah, okay. So I was looking on the map, and it says, I mean, like they're going to take 4 spaces out. Now, what are they doing now? And there's a large parking lot behind the building, and so I'm just wondering why we have to give up 4 parking spaces to accommodate, I mean, and to have their vehicles there? You know, that's one,
It's just 2 additional. There's
I
already
know,
2.
no, but 2 additional anything, you know. When I went to the LSC last year, one of the speakers said, do you have your city cars, do you have them parked in front of your city hall? You know, are they there? They shouldn't be. They should be as far away as they should be. That's the perception people get is, wow, they think they're really something. You know, here I'm doing business, they work there, they could walk to their cars too. Anyway, so this is kind of what I was wondering, why, I mean, what they're doing now and why they feel that they need the 2 extra parking spaces just for their staff vehicles, because they have a
It's
huge
not
parking
normal,
lot.
the way they describe it, it's not just normal customers, it's folks that may, that they're in custody, may have some handcuffs or possibly or something. That's possibly a safety issue, is why they're trying to avoid it being right on Lion Street.
It's just a passenger loading zone area.
So it's not all-day parking for cops?
It's in and out with their, you know, they want to have a space available to offload their customers, I guess, or clients, if that's another way to put it, or
Yeah. Oh, Ron? Yeah. Sorry, you're going to have to sit through this meeting. Yeah.
The spaces are used now by the probation department, and they do have a back door right next to the building there where they take custody of our probationers, often in chains, in through the back door. And so they like to park there, and there are 2 spaces there now for that use. One of the spaces is very close to Lion Street. When they unload their customers, They're close to the signal, and they're worried about them getting hit by the car because they're so close to the intersection. And so what they'd like to do is move that function another space away from the intersection, and essentially get rid of the first space. What they'd also like to do is they say that they have 2 more additional staff that sound to me like fleet vehicles that they'd like to park on the street. And so their initial request was to eliminate 1 space and have 4 spaces designated for them, 2 of which would be used by the probation department. And so the staff recommendation in the resolution is not to get rid of the first space, designate 4 spaces for them, and let them figure out which of those 2 they would load and unload people from, and which would just be for fleet vehicles.
How would it be labeled?
It would probably be labeled with yellow curb along the length of the 4 spaces with signs posted that said official vehicles only. The 2 that are there now, I believe, say official vehicles only.
And so help me remember, are there anything directly across the street? Like a business? Some businesses?
The old Nissan Motors building.
I believe the corner it's the corner of the Pizza Italian restaurant?
No, it's the
That's blocked down.
Listen building.
I don't remember there being commercial activity directly across the street. I do know that the parking along that block is often tied up by a combination of employees from the office buildings. And so we're a little reluctant to get rid of a space that would otherwise be legal space because it is so tight in that area.
It's Anthony's.
Ron, can the sign then be posted where it's just loading zone during certain hours, so after they're closed in the evening, that people wouldn't think that they could not park there? If it was just from 8 till 5, or?
You could choose to put a time limit on it. You could say official vehicles only, and we could put a time limit underneath it. I don't know that in the evening those are very high-demand spaces for the commercial users. They're pretty far away from the restaurants. But it's...
Well, yeah, another block. Or no, it's just around the corner from Pizza King.
But if I don't think there's a reason why it couldn't have a time limit. I don't think the offices are using it at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, that might help. I mean, I wouldn't want somebody to think that evening time, well, they couldn't park there when nobody would be using it from the probation, so. Okay, so what would you like to do with this item? Bessie, you pulled it off.
Well, I mean, that was kind of like a maybe. I mean, I don't want it to be just totally yellow curbed, because I think that, the businesses around there, they need the parking too, and so, can you promise me?
I can't promise you how the
haven't been here for a long time.
public will behave. The 2 existing spaces right now do not have yellow curb. They're just posted with signs. At some point, it's difficult to delineate official vehicle areas versus unofficial areas if all you do is post signs. But how many signs would it take? And it would be, end here, begin here. And so if it's a official vehicle with a yellow curb, it's pretty easy for the public to figure out where that area is and for us to mark it. It's a little more difficult if we try and do it only with signs. On the other hand, it's less confusing after hours if there's no yellow curb there. So I think we could probably do it without the yellow curb, but it's going to be more confusing during the day. We could do it with the yellow curb, and it's probably not quite as flexible as maybe you're after.
States for no public parking, official vehicles only. So could we have it state from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday? Is that okay? Are we able to put that on signs? Designate the time?
You are pretty much free to create out of whole cloth restrictions on the public street system. I think Jim would nod his head up and down for that.
Okay. Bill?
Well, I kind of agree with Bessie a little bit. They've got a big parking lot behind there. Now, what it states they want to do is have 2 spots to load and unload and 2 spots for parking official vehicles. I could see the 2 official vehicles there all night, all weekend, all the time. I don't think that they would free up necessarily at night. I guess my question is, why can't they park the 2 vehicles in the parking lot behind the building?
But they're not open. Probation. I think so. Not at night.
I understand what Ray is saying, and you too, Ron, about unloading and loading people in chains or handcuffs or whatever. But it states that the other two spots will be just for parking official vehicles. So those could be parole and probation people that drive out and visit people and come back and park their car and go back in their office and fill out their reports and so forth. Seems like they could park in the parking lot.
Yeah, see, that's kind of what was my concern was, if they need two, I guess, but the extra two just because, so that they can park there, I have a problem with that. I really do. So,
The parking lot on the other side of the building for Department of Human Services, that is Department of Human Services. I don't think that's parole and probation or Pizza King or anybody else's parking.
What? I mean, well, parole and probation is in that building.
They're in the building, but do
Yeah.
they have the option to use the DHS parking lot?
Oh, you're saying DHS is, yeah.
parking back?
I don't know, it's all state
That's a state
facility.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
maybe we should find out, if they can or can't. Where do they do park now? I mean, if they have to park 3 blocks away, maybe it's a possibility, but.
You're right, because that's Lynn County parole and probation, so.
Well, it's actually with the state. But yeah.
My observation has been that that parking lot tends to fill up, and an awful lot of the spaces are taken by customers, and that the tenants of the office, the state and the county, often instruct their employees to park outside of that parking lot because there's not enough room. They have the same shortage problem a lot of us, the city has the same problem. And so I suspect that's why they're after assigned vehicles for these 2 extra spaces, is they don't have room in the parking lot.
I could go for the 2, but not the 4.
So what would council like to do with this item?
You want a motion again, or are we done with the conversation?
Not going to make the motion, no.
She's not going to make the motion. She pulled the item off, but a councilor can make a motion if
I
you want to
move for
proceed
adoption of
forward.
item number 3 on the consent calendar.
Okay. And any more discussion?
That hard
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Do you want to take roll call?
Olson,
Yes.
Collins,
Yes.
Johnson. No. Kellum,
Yes.
Hopsinski,
Yes.
Coburn.
No.
It's 4 yes, 2 no.
Okay, all right, motion carried. Okay, thank you, Ron. All right, next is Nolan. I think you've been back there, or Jeff, are you bringing this item forward?
I am.
Well, it's about time.
Don't touch the mic, Jeff.
Don't move the mic.
Directions. Okay. So we had open bids for Main Street, the Main Street Rehabilitation Project on February 19th. We received 7 bids and are recommending award to the low bidder, Mid-Valley Gravel of Philomath, Oregon, in the amount of $1,770,373. We'll notice that the project is estimated to be over the budgeted amount. This project is primarily funded through SDCs, and there are adequate reserves to cover that difference. The only other thing I'd like to point out on this one is that this is a project that we had bid last fiscal year and elected to reject all bids and hold it over for a more favorable bid climate this past winter. And so that decision by council has saved the city approximately $170,000. So with that, I'd recommend award a bid to the low bidder, Mid-Valley Gravel of Philomath.
Move to award.
Second.
One thing that just dawned on me seeing the bid was, and the traffic circle, which I'm really looking forward to this project. Is there going to be any sort of design for the center of the traffic circle? What is it going to look like? I mean, I did have a few requests from some people wanting to have some thoughts to what they'd like to see in the middle, and I was wondering if maybe we should reach out to the neighborhood and get some public input of what they'd like to see for the center of the circle.
Currently, it's just planned for landscaping, the typical thing that we see in the middle of the roundabout. That was an area that was discussed. I don't know if it was ever brought forward, but that could be an area if council chose to do something with that, then yes, we could do something else. Currently, it is in the budget just to do landscaping.
Okay. So,
We had planned on bringing, there were several suggestions that had been made at different points in time, and we had, as Nolan mentioned, from a budget standpoint, we planned for our traditional landscaping.
Perennials?
We don't have a landscape plan developed. We let those contracts separately, so we would use a,
Well, it just seems to me that when we put landscaping in, when we start putting in grass instead of ground cover, we then have to mow the grass. We ask for trees, they ought to be something that's not deciduous, so we don't have to go pick up the leaves. It's just a thought process.
we've typically installed low-maintenance landscaping in both of the roundabouts that we've installed previously. So we would be more than happy to bring something back and to discuss what the center of the roundabout, there's some creative ideas out there that we could pursue.
yeah, okay, that'd be great. Yeah, Floyd?
Yeah, really unrelated to the award of bid itself, but related to the funding for the additional money that this project is made up from primarily STCI and our street capital. I've been having conversations with some citizens recently about appropriated and unappropriated reserves, and this is an example of why we have unappropriated reserves, so that when there are overruns, we have flexibility. If all the items we now have as appropriated reserves became unappropriated, we couldn't move to award this. We'd have to wait till next year to totally rebudget it or find funds elsewhere. So this is an example of how we use our unappropriated reserves that really become the beginning cash balance in and out of a fiscal year. So with that, I would move.
It's already been motioned.
It's already been moved, seconded?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, yep.
Jeff, you said the landscape contract has not been let yet?
That's correct. I guess I'll let Nolan clarify, but we typically let those separate.
Okay. So are there provisions in this contract that we're going to award tonight for getting a water line out to the center of that roundabout?
Yes, there are.
Good. So then when we do have landscaping, at least we can water it and we're not tearing up a new street or whatever.
And power, of course.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. All right, thank you. Thank you, Nolan. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, next, business from the council. So Dick, you want to go first? Did you want to ask those questions? Because I was going to say if we can do them and let Ann be able to head out.
This first one is similar to Rich's complaint about noise. It's on page 68, and it's item 2 under 3110, and it says there is no visible outside storage of materials or commodities except plant materials. Now, does that mean visible from the street, or does that mean just plain visible?
I couldn't hear the last part of your question. So I've got 3.1102, there is no visible outside storage of materials or commodities except plant materials. Did you ask if that was from the street? I just couldn't hear you very well.
Yeah. Is this visibility from the street, or is this a backyard visibility, or whatever?
No, it is not clear, I see that. I would say...
think it'd be pretty
from-
grim if you're trying to do a business and you can't put stuff around behind the garage every once in a while.
I would say the drive-by test, but we could add
Okay.
from the street.
That's good enough for me. Let's just leave it as is. Well, let's just say visibility from the street. And the next one is item 3160 on page 71. Talks about penalties. Non-compliance of the order of the director or his designee, planning commission, or hearings board will assess the penalties. And then you've crossed out any way to appeal it to the hearings board or anybody else, I guess. Was that the intent, that there be no appeal to these penalties?
Well, this used to follow after a hearing following a complaint, but our idea is that the hearing actually happens before a business gets established now, that we don't do it on a complaint basis. But there isn't a provision to appeal if there is a infraction. But I don't think that's the way it was set, the way it is currently.
So currently, I can appeal if somebody penalizes me for...
There isn't appeal of the sanction, and Jim's getting ready to say something.
Enforcement would have to be basically through city court, and so you would have to be convicted of a violation. So it's not going to be a situation where some official gets to arbitrarily say, you have done something wrong and you therefore cannot appeal. If it is a prospective standard, then there would be either appeals up the line to Planning Commission, Council, or LUBA. If it is a subsequent matter where the approval is in place and you are deemed in violation, then it would have to be enforced civilly or criminally, and you'd be entitled to due process either way.
So in the first situation, is that what we have now with our rules? Where you can appeal to the council or LUBA?
Well, Ann, this is out of, you've got one page out of the code here. I don't know what this is all referring to.
Well, so on page 71, right now, something only goes to hearings board or the planning commission on a complaint basis if they request that we take it through that process. And that doesn't happen very often because we have challenges determining the subjective language, whether we have enough case. The other problem we have right now is we don't even have an application. So we don't have an application from the complainant or from the applicant. It's not really a good land use process the way it's written. The proposal to move to requiring a conditional use application for some types of land use, or if we hear a complaint, to have them be processed as a conditional use, because most of the standards, if you can't meet it outright, you would be processed as a conditional use, would happen in a different order. So right now, the appeal, your appeal process about your neighbor running a business is essentially requesting a public hearing through the complaint process. And that rarely happens. We haven't been using this process because it has some flaws in it, which is why we wanted to try to fix this. But the penalty part doesn't really come into play. That hasn't come into play since I've been here.
Well, but the answer is...
I don't care about that. If you got it in the book, there's always a chance you can complain.
Yeah,
the penalty
and
it's referred to as the general penalty in Section 1 of Albany Municipal Code. That requires enforcement in city court. So nobody can unilaterally assess a penalty other than the judge.
Well, what is this?
Section 1.04.01 is what I'm referring to. Punishable as an infraction, punishable. It's in Section 7, page 71.
Okay.
Just the one you were directing me to, I thought.
Yeah, right.
That's the general penalty for the Albany Municipal Code. So if you are deemed to have violated the standards, or you're accused of violating the standards, before a penalty could be imposed against you, you would have to be found to have committed that violation in municipal court.
But, okay, non-compliance with the orders of the director. So somebody has to say, okay, you're not complying, director ordered me to comply with this.
Right.
And all automatically remanded to the civil penalty, to the court?
No, what it says is if non-compliance with the orders of the director, his designee, the planning commission, or hearings board, as referred to above, are an infraction. So if you don't comply with the standards that are set by the planning commission, so if you get a development code approval, and the planning commission issues an approval, and the planning commission says the conditions of our approval are A, B, and C, and you don't comply with those, or the city doesn't think you are complying, you would be cited into municipal court for a violation. And the burden would be on the city to prove that you didn't comply. Now, if you wanted to, this doesn't have anything to do, however, with your ability to appeal the decision of the planning commission to the city council or to LUBA. It's once the standards are in effect, you are ordered to comply with them, just like any other law, and if you don't, you're subject to enforcement. This does not remove the ability, however, to appeal initial discretionary determinations that are made by the hearings board or the planning commission. The same normal appeal that applies now would apply.
Even though these next three paragraphs have been X'd out.
Well, they're covered under 3.150 on the previous page, on page 70, the process for complaints. It's just covered a little bit earlier, so we didn't need that repetitive language. We already have a lot of this
Okay.
information, setting up a hearing elsewhere in the code, so we took it out.
Well, like we said before, it's, we get this last, when did we get? Last Thursday or Friday, and it's 140-some pages. It's kind of hard to study everything and understand it, so I appreciate your comments on that. A couple more. Page 76. This has to do with the rooftops counting as open space, and I think you already explained that. It's that downtown buildings that take up the whole block. These rooftop open spaces count for.
Planned development.
Yeah, it's just a different provision.
It's page 76. Oh, it's A there. Land that may be counted toward the open space requirement includes rooftop amenities. So that applies for downtown buildings, not residential buildings.
The provisions for downtown and the common open space is actually in Article 8, and that's a little further back. This section here that you've got is for planned development, so when you create a planned neighborhood, you set aside a certain amount of open space, and this is describing what can be set aside as common open space, but there's a similar provision for multifamily development in Article 8, and rooftops would be one of the allowances to count towards the requirement, although we're proposing to exempt them from most of the requirements.
Those are multiple family buildings.
Like planned developments could be like the RCM homes, and correct, that was a planned development. And when we added these planned developments, we had these back when we used to have a lot of manufactured home parks also, which we don't see a lot of those planned developments, that type of development.
Well, it's...
Manufactured home with
No,
rooftop.
there's a separate section for manufactured homes. This is, typically they're residential developments and they're big neighborhoods where you have them built out in phases, and they might have a common area with, whether it's a building or a park that's a common area. But what you're talking about, Dick, for the open space downtown, where I said we were going to be exempting some of these downtown developments from open space, is actually on page 103. Pages 102 and 103. And so there is a provision.
So these are for regular residential developments where you can count rooftop stuff.
Very few developments go through as planned developments. They often go through if they want flexibility from certain standards, so you can be a little more flexible with your lot sizes and different things. There are some advantages, and usually the give back for that flexibility is setting aside some open space, or you want to be able to transfer the density from an area that you can't develop because of maybe a natural area over. The plan development might be the process that you do. That's an existing process in the code. We're just proposing to reduce the amount of open space required in those plan developments and streamline the process. We don't get them very much, but it's something that was an obstacle with Edgewater because of how the formula is calculated and the amount.
Doesn't sound like a very good idea to me, but I don't know what the rest of the council thinks. There's another one here. Page 96. This was letting businesses develop in the industrial zones? Because they, is that because it's less expensive to develop in an industrial zone? And it seems to me like we have a lot of vacant business buildings right now.
Yeah, there was some discussion about this at the task force meeting.
It says, item G, the city has received numerous requests for commercial uses in vacant LI buildings. And LI, I guess, is light industrial.
Right. Well, I would assume...
I think you're proposing to allow that?
We are proposing to do that in existing buildings only for certain kinds of uses. After talking to the business community and actually a business owner, it's the kind of businesses that don't need drive-by traffic, don't need to be in the areas where you're going to have a lot of customers and rely on that. But the kinds that we were getting requests from were dance studios, fitness gyms, kind of small, what isn't an industry, but that is a commercial use. And so the proposal was, after talking with the state, this land isn't necessarily needed for employment, and so they were okay with us lightening up on the uses allowed in that zone. But the provisions would be that there was a neighborhood meeting held so that the new use isn't going to not fit in with the industrial characteristics of the area, and that the building and the site can't be precluded from going back to industrial use, so that the changes aren't so substantial, and that they meet obviously the ingress egress issues with traffic and parking.
Well, I guess my concern would be the situation where a city or somebody builds an airport on open land, and then residential people move in next to the airport and complain about the airport. But in this case, it would be the dance studio moves into an industrial building, and Rich moves in with his welding and metal beating business next door, and the dance studio complains about all this noise we got next door. So do we listen to that complaint about the noise, or do we say, well, maybe better move into a business zone rather than an industrial zone?
That specifically came up, and it came up at the governmental affairs meeting at the chamber. On page 98 at the bottom, under B, retail sales and service uses in existing buildings and light industrial.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm sorry, page 98, that this is discussed, exactly this issue.
Okay.
It's little 4IV at the bottom under B. The new commercial user shall acknowledge that existing industrial uses have a right to operate free from the new user complaining about externalities typical of an industrial use. So we'll come up with an acknowledgement form. There was a suggestion that there be a more formal process, but we came down to an acknowledgement form so that they can't, it's just some way to avoid them complaining about the industries in the area that really have the first right there.
So in a nutshell, they can't complain about it?
Well, that's what we're hoping the acknowledgement form would try to do.
Yeah.
But that, respectfully, if there is, for example, a noise standard, and they don't like the noise standard, they're not precluded from complaining about it.
Even though they're in the wrong zone?
Yes. So I mean, don't adopt a standard that you don't want enforced. If you, I mean, right.
My issue, my question?
Then Floyd?
What I think this leaves out is if you, and probably something that should be thought about is, what happens if the dance studio moves into the area and then the adjoining one gets an industrial business that moves in afterwards? Right. This says the guy that's already there is protected, but the new guy, because they're going to be paying more than a dance studio probably.
But I think the way you address this problem is adopt whatever standards for noise, dust, odors, anything you think are appropriate in an industrial zone.
Right.
And then if a business moves into the industrial zone, those are still the standards. They may not like them, but those are the standards. But they can't be precluded from complaining about them, but as long as you keep the standards industrial, that's your best protection.
They can complain, you can tell them this is the standards, and quit complaining.
Well, I can tell them that, but I haven't
Well,
been
I mean,
universally
our-
successful.
no, Not you personally, but our laws would tell them that, our rules would tell them that.
No, our rules are going to be the rules. And
Yeah, that's
if they
rules, so-
complain about a violation of a rule, they can't complain about, if there are industrial standards for noise, dust, et cetera, and they don't like them, they can come and complain to the council, I guess. I mean, people do all the time.
Yeah, we say, well, there's nothing we can do about it, so
Well,
either enjoy it or move.
well, that would be the appropriate response for the council to give.
Yeah, thank you.
Lloyd?
That's what I suggested to begin with, I think.
My turn now, Dick?
Yeah.
Okay. My point was really Rich's. I understand Jim's legal point. Just the common reading of the language, I would add, or new users in compliance with the standards for light industrial zones. I mean, it's explicit, it says it.
That's on page 98.
I would insert that language under item 4, little 4 under B.
Yeah, we can reword that.
Yeah.
You can bring that back in?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, that's all I had, and I'll have to apologize, I was running out of gas by the time I got to page 98, so I
Okay.
didn't see that.
All right. Okay, you did, since business from the council, did you have any other items?
I don't.
Okay, all right, Bill?
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Okay, Bessie?
Nothing tonight.
Okay, Floyd?
Well, I didn't say anything during the discussion, and by the time I wanted to say something, would already tabled the motion, but when dealing with the home occupations and the residential zones, to me, it comes down, a residential zone has usual and customary noises and expectations. Business activities are kind of an exception in a residential zone, and you're asking permission to do something special or in addition to being a standard resident. A reasonable level of standards, I think, is applicable. If you don't think you can comply with reasonable and customary noises, at some point you need to be in a commercial zone. Now, I don't think we want to void all of our zoning text to say that we're going to have a hodgepodge. At which point does a commercial activity become an industrial activity in a residential zone? So I think we need to have something. It is a privilege that we are extending under the zoning code to have that activity, and we want to be flexible in doing that, and the proposed code is more flexible than what we have on the books today.
Exactly. Yep, thank you. Anything else?
No.
Okay, Ray? Okay, Rich?
Yes, Ann? I would like to thank you for doing this, and I am glad I'm not the one who has to do it. That's it.
Okay, I didn't have anything this evening, Wes.
I do have a brief report from the Public Safety Facilities Review Committee that met last night. The committee came to a consensus that they would like to see the city council move forward with the development of a site plan and sort of preliminary drawings for what the new fire station would look like. They had earlier reached consensus at their previous meeting that A, we need a new fire station, and B, the fire station needs to be located on its current site. And last night, they reached agreement, although they didn't reach agreement on the wording, they reached agreement on the principle of wanting to see the council move forward with developing those plans. The chair, or the co-chair of the commission, former Sheriff Burright, asked that that at least be communicated to you. It may have been in the paper, so you may have already seen it, but I just wanted to give the council a heads up because it's going to take some time to do that, and it's a really critical decision that you're going to have to make to proceed with that recommendation if that's the way you choose to go. Obviously, if you're going to put out if you're going to do what they were talking about, doing something in the neighborhood of $200,000, that's going to require an RFP. You're going to want to consider, whether or not the people you hire to do this are likely to be the people who you would want to work on the development of plans, the full-scale plans, the construction plans for the facility that they believe needs to be built. So, I think what the commission and what the chair was trying to get at is to give the council a heads up that you maybe want to be thinking about the process that you want to use for an RFP for the planning of the new facility.
So I think what we've done in the past and for RFPs, and mostly when we proceed with some sort of facility like this, which we would have been doing that if the bond had passed, is to get the public input and have the public be a part of that process. Mostly when it comes to our downtown historic district, we need to make sure the piece of the RFP going out includes the public participating in it. Just like what we did with the carousel also is went out for that RFP. Those architects had to go through a process and bring in the public of what would you like to see in this facility. So did they discuss that at all at the facility
level?
That was
not discussed, but that's a council decision as to how you want to proceed with the development of the plans. They were just saying bring in a firm. I think most firms that do that kind of work understand the need for some kind of a public participation phase in the process. So.
And I think, that's the best kind of route to go, which that's most likely, we would have been going through that process. So with this facilities committee, it's more, I don't know if they're wanting to make the decision over the design, but that's historically, it needs to be the public brought into that process. So, yeah. Floyd?
One West, is there agreement or consensus on the part of the task group of the functions to be included, which were the same functions that were in the original, ACZ or? They had a description of the functions included in the station.
Yeah, I don't think, well, Marilyn can chime in. I would hate to say that there was complete agreement on that, because I don't think they took any kind of formal or polling. There was some discussion, but.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Sheriff Burright after you did today, and he wants specifically to bring back at the April 8th meeting the continued discussion of the program elements of the building.
Right.
They did not get through that last night, and he was hoping they would.
Well, I think that, given their desire, their expressed desire, I think we should move ahead with an RFP to get the ball rolling, because it takes time to get there. And the RFP, in my mind, and they haven't addressed the police station yet, but it ought to include an option to do something should they move forward with that. But what Sharon talked about was having an element in there of public participation. That's just a piece of the expectation of what the consultant would ultimately perform. It's not the RFP in and of itself. So I would favor.
And let me clarify, too, it'd be more the public participation process is not so much over the site plan of it. What they want to see is the building design.
Exterior.
The
Right.
exterior of it, and that's where we'd really want to be able to get the public to weigh in on what they'd like to see.
They're interested in what it
built.
looks like. Some of us are interested in what it does.
Yeah, but
So,
I guarantee most folks want to know what the outside of that looks like, and mostly when it comes to our historic district, they want to make sure it's going to fit in, too.
Well,
so.
I certainly support staff moving ahead, doing the RFP, getting it out, getting somebody coming in and having some proposals on the table.
Okay, the only thing I would qualify that with is that, given that they didn't agree on the language of their recommendation, I would rather not start until after they actually have their next
That's
meeting.
okay.
Okay, I just want to make clear on the
So
timing of this.
for you to then communicate to them that if this moves forward, the council is in support of moving ahead.
I'm sure Steve's going to communicate that tomorrow.
Ray?
Okay, educate me a little bit. Can you do an RFP if you don't have a clue as to what your budget might be to make this happen?
This would be a step toward the development of a budget. That's one of the things that
How
they.
can you come up with a design if you don't know what you're working with?
Well, if you know roughly what the size of the building is and what some of its elements are going to be, that's what they're trying to actually get the council to do and this would have been probably the next stage in the process that ZCS performed for us when they did the assessment. They did all the program elements and said, okay, this is what you need in the building. What they were proposing to do, at least according to my recollection, in the next phase was to start these preliminary designs and plans so they could come more close. Now, they've already given you rough estimates
Exactly,
of what.
exactly.
So they're just trying to tighten them up now, so.
Okay.
Yeah, Bessie?
Yeah. I think I'm hearing it right, but do we have to reinvent the wheel? I mean, as to get our own design and whatever, I mean, there've been many fire stations built in the state, instead of going out, and like I said, reinventing the wheel, can't we get some ideas of, I was talking to my husband today, I says, well, why not get a design, and then we can tweak it to where, if it doesn't quite fit, I mean, we can do it that way, but I can't see spending all the money to, if it's already a good idea of what we want, why redesign?
I suppose every site plan is sort of different, of how the footprint of it's going to be.
Well, yeah,
so,
but that's what I'm
yeah.
talking about, you can move it around, if you got it more
Yeah.
this way or whatever, I mean,
Kate, you're busy back there. How much did it cost for the preliminary with the architect on the carousel? What was, the original was to come up with the design, and then it was additional for the complete development plans was another phase. Do you remember? Was it 140? Yeah, for the preliminary design. But their complete plans was another 400, wasn't it? Yeah, on that, so it's kind of something we can kind of look at, compare.
Bessie, it was discussed, and the group could modify in some way their recommendation to you. I feel a little nervous about speaking for them, but I was asked to do this.
yes.
There was a discussion about trying to take advantage of what other communities had done, and that's something we can look at, and we at the staff level can try and see if we can build that in to somehow maybe cut down on our costs. I mean, if you look at the ZCS assessment that they did, they actually did that. They'd had experience. They had done Klamath Falls and a couple
Yes,
of others.
I remember, I think I still got it up in my
And so to
cupboard.
some extent, they do that anyway, because the people who respond to these RFPs are people that do this routinely.
Exactly.
So if they have one that, they can take advantage, then presumably they can give you a better price.
Yeah, okay.
A nice-looking fire station in McMinnville. Fairly new, I think. Yeah.
Bill?
How would this impact our ability to pursue the design-build concept?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have a good answer, and I don't want to speak, and the commission has not really weighed in at all on the question of what process to use, but the more money you invest in the design independent of the build, I think the farther down the road you are to a conventional design, bid, build process. So and I don't want to say it would foreclose design build, but I think it would make it less advantageous at some point. Is that fair, Jeff?
I would concur.
Okay, so is everybody okay with having staff work on that
Sure.
to the level you're comfortable with?
Well, exactly, and like I said, I really don't feel comfortable investing any time, or other than some preliminary work internally about who might, we'll assign Jeff to do this, of course, but until we hear more specific direction from the committee.
Yeah, I forgot to mention it. Read in the paper that Larry Nelson, who has been on our public safety committee, and he's been very active in neighborhood watches and stuff, his wife passed away. And so I just thought it'd be nice if the council would send him a card.
Yeah, we'll do that. Remind me, or Marilyn, can you not? I've actually got cards at home. Yeah.
She'd
been sick for some time.
Had she? Oh.
I thought she had, because she was really getting popular.
But it'd be nice to have the card from the Public Safety Commission, too, because he's been on that since day one,
Yeah.
on that commission.
Really has.
So, yeah. Oh, that's too bad. Okay, anything else, Wes?
No.
Okay, staff have anything else? So, anything else? Okay. Our next work session is March 24th, and then regular session is March 26th, but I think we have Kara next week, so with that, we're adjourned.